So on the same day, October 1st of 2021, the Wall Street Journal published the loss of that baby in Alabama, but we knew that we dismissed as anecdotes or random or just one. We also on that same day published the first statistical proof of loss of life that cyber attacks can degrade a hospital and a region sufficient to drive excess deaths, both for time-sensitive conditions like heart, brain, and stroke, and pulmonary, but also through some excess death analysis our data science team did. And then number 3 on the panel is Lisa Young, a systemic and risk management and cyber physical systems person from the team. So that's going to be session 2, is some of the things we saw where bits and bytes were meeting flesh and blood on a daily basis. I think several of us have PTSD from that, but these are some of the superheroes from different backgrounds than hacking that brought their skills to bear, along with Beau and others, and Spanky and many others that had a very different pandemic experience than many of you. Next up will be Rivers on Fire, and David Batts is going to walk through, since many of you didn't even see all these, but we had existence proofs of attacks on water, on food supply, on oil and gas pipelines, on municipalities, and we have a tour de force through some of those existence proofs and possibly how parts of government are and are not reacting appropriately. So that'll simmer you in maybe things you knew half of, but you'll know more of. Followed by one common thread through most of these victims is they are target-rich, cyber poor. We just took a riff on Wendy Nather's poverty line, but in a much more applied and operational way. And one of the uncomfortable truths here is even though the government sponsors ISACs and or information sharing and analysis centers for all 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and even though they sponsor sector coordinating councils of leadership from the public-private partnership, and even though there's lots of free information sharing and free indicators of compromise and free resources from CISA and the different agencies responsible for those 16, like healthcare is HHS for the healthcare industry, most of the participants in there are the cyber rich. They're the haves, not the have-nots. Most of the attacks and the victims were the have-nots. They're below that poverty line. So if the private sector sees no money in helping the cyber poor and the public sector says, let's partner with the private sector, we have a very circular problem. So I have a deep passion and burden on my heart for fit for purpose help to the target-rich cyber poor owners and operators of critical infrastructure. We cannot say just do best practices, just do zero trust, just do this, just do that. They don't have a single cybersecurity person on staff. We have to meet them where they are, identify and buy down risk, and we did that every single day in the CIS task force with what we had available. I'm hoping maybe part of our next phase of our mission is crowdsourcing and creating tools that actually help people because the private sector won't. And my framing for that is, if you think of a pyramid with the Fortune 100 and 500 up top, and then there's everybody else down below, ransomware gave the adversaries, the attackers, a way to monetize the cyber poor. Defenders have not figured out how to monetize the cyber poor. So it's a feeding frenzy. Attackers can monetize the poor. Defenders have not figured it out. So they are prone. They were always prey. They were always prone. And now predators have taken notice. So we have a feeding frenzy for the foreseeable future. And when you press my former agency and their teammates in government, they say, well, we partner with the private sector. And that's a sincere answer, but it's not a helpful one. So there are some existence proofs that some of my CISA teammates are going to talk about where we did things for the cyber poor, like get your stuff off search, or as I like to call it, get your shit off Shodan. Free scanning services. We coined this thing, CISA.gov bad practices you're going to hear about. So not just best practices, but what are the most dangerous things that we encounter, and how can those become the negligence standard or eradicated strategically? And while they are common practices, they're also dangerous. So that's going to be maybe a nudge and inspiration for tomorrow. Jen Ellis has assembled some govies as well. A lot of progress has been made over the last 2 years. So we're going to have a policy update with our friend Leonard Bailey from DOJ on strides to further decriminalize good faith security research, which is one of our day one goals. So that's amazing. And we have a hacker as a Senate staffer in a pretty important Senate position who's going to talk about some of the other things that have happened and things that are coming, because a huge chunk of what we do is not fixing a single flaw in a single device from a single manufacturer, but maybe changing the rules to make more defensible, maintainable, reliable digital infrastructure. And then we'll have a feedback loop from you. So that was a lot of stuff for day one. You're going to hear much more detail from our assembled team. But this is to simmer you in the discomfort that shit's on fire. Most of them are target rich and cyber poor. There are not ample solutions or engagement models. And in some of those sectors, like food, there's not even an ISAC. So just like I said, the cavalry isn't coming 9 years ago. I meant it for different certain specific details. But for now, there's a lot to do, and there's no one stepping up to do it. So we can either get them to the starting line with us, or we can fill a void temporarily. But there is much that has been accomplished that we should be very, very proud of. And there is much, much more to do, which will pivot us into tomorrow. And in case I don't have an opening session, I'll do a much faster version of tomorrow. Press coverage has been one form for cybersecurity for a very long time. So we've asked Lily Hay Newman from Wired to help us assemble some press to say, how should press change? If shit's on fire now, we always say, well, until bad things happen, this is theoretical. Well, they're happening. And I want to ensure that we don't always have a private or commercial voice giving, corporate talking points when there's people dying, or that whenever I say, hey, there were losses of life in this particular ransomware in a hospital, we don't have someone say, yeah, but what about the patient record count and the fines? Like, we want to make sure that we're focused on the right things. And this will be a conversation tomorrow about how can we best make ourselves available to the press, and how do we ensure that coverage of consequence makes deliberate, conscious changes. And there's some obstacles that are unobvious that Lily and I were discussing a couple days ago. It's going to be tough, right? Press works a certain way. We work a certain way. We're going to have to work a different way if we want to differentiate corporate security from cyber physical safety and public safety. Followed by SBOM. SBOM is a double talk. SBOM, software bill of materials. Woo! This is one of those day one cavalry ideas that's crossed the chasm and is in an executive order. It's happening. It's inevitable. It is not easy. There's some opposition. But SBOM is a dual talk tomorrow. It's really both showing how things like software bill of materials, software transparency, software trustworthiness could be part of the answer for target-rich cyber poor. Maybe they can't invest in security, but they can get more of a head start and a leg up on some of these things. But also, one of the coolest things in the SBOM movement was an open source project called Daggerboard that was a hospital said, hey, no one's building anything for us. We're going to build it ourselves. And they open sourced it. So it's not a solution for all things SBOM, but how do people consume and operate and avail themselves of things like SBOMs from plural places and plural levels of quality? Next time there's a Log4j. And there are still hospitals calling me, even last week, saying it's been 8 months, Josh, I still don't have an impact analysis from my vendors. 8 months later, we still don't know where Log4j is for some of the medical devices. No promise of patching. So that's part of why we want to talk about SBOM. And I think it's a decent universe and a grain of sand that may inspire why we need more developers in the cavalry ranks, why we need to build more tools that can meet a wastewater treatment facility where they are, solve their problems for their most egregious exposures, while we're waiting for the cavalry to come from either coin-operated private sector and or the government figuring out whose swim lanes or which swim lanes and how to help. So that's going to be both informational for SBOM, but also hopefully inspirational for the kind of things we might want to do in the next phase of the cavalry. Trying to do this from memory. We have an ICS talk on how to talk to stakeholders about ICS and OT security issues. And I might have this in the slightly wrong order. And then we also have basically what I've been calling act local, act global talk, which is there's been some state level experiments, and Ray from Michigan is going to talk about one of the state level experiments in the state of Michigan for hackers working at the local state level. There's been a lot of efforts from Beau, from others, the National Governors Association in the past, but this is more tailored, fit for purpose at each state or municipality level. And then we have some people from the Cyber Peace Institute that are talking about how that is a part of an overall patchwork of parallel experimentation internationally. And there have been some national and global movements like the Cyber Threat Intelligence League, CTI League, that helped operationally with these hospital attacks early in the pandemic and continues to. So there are new parallel efforts, cavalry in shape or in spirit. And this is potentially one of the areas where we're going to have to go higher internationally. Beau led a really incredible initiative with the World Economic Forum. That is one of those global examples of maybe minimum pledges for how IoT should not have hard-coded passwords, for example, or be patchable. Things that you might have heard from this group for a while. So this could be part of our future, is scaling up and down and laterally, and seeing what you can do to help your local municipalities for your food, your hospitals, your state governments. And then I think I didn't miss any, but we're also going to do a very large chunk of workshopping to hear from you as to what you think we can and should do and commit to do, and how we can get some scale. And Jen and others reminded me that while Beau and I and some of the other longstanding advocates and public speakers and ambassadors do the best we can, we really need logistical and organizational and back office support. We need project management. We need to get better at being historians, capturing the truth, maybe having records of what happened when, in what order, by whom. So there's a lot more roles to be filled that would give us more scale, more staying power, and more parallel action. And Klaus, I don't see Klaus in the room, but Klaus has been the volunteer coordinator and wrangler for much longer than any single person should have to. So we're really looking for more welcome wagon and onboarding that can, whenever someone says, hey, I would like to help, how do I get started? So there's a lot of volunteer roles to be filled, and maybe we can identify some of those in our 2-hour session tomorrow. I just gave you an avalanche of logistics as opposed to inspiration. How much time do I have left? Where's my proctor? Huh? How many? Okay. All right. Any questions on that avalanche? The overall theme and feeling we want you to have is 9 years ago we said stuff was flammable and we wanted to be left to boom to prevent harm and maintain trust. We've done some incredible things, and I hope for a few minutes now to share some of the highlights from the last 9 years while I pull up some slides. But now that things are on fire, I do think the mission needs to change. I just don't know how. We could say mission accomplished. I don't really think that's apt. We could definitely get some new leadership and new blood into the mix, but I think it's going to have to be a reorganization of the focal points and how we measure success. All right. Would you like to share a couple of your favorite accomplishments over the last 9 years, or compare and contrast?
Yeah, sure. So as I was thinking about what we could talk about today, it occurred to me that like 9 years ago, as Josh said, there was a lot of kindling. There's a lot of things that could catch fire. Some of them we saw catch fire, and we paid the most attention to those, tended to look at those the most because they're in the press, they're in the hype cycle. But that's not all that's happened in these. So for every highly visible failure, there is at least one measurable piece of progress in that area. So if you think back, 9 years ago, I think that was a year or two after we saw people drive cars off the road through hacking them. The auto industry said, oh, well, that only happened because you were sitting in the seat next to the driver. That can't happen remotely. And then the next year they made it happen remotely. They said, well, yeah, but that's theoretical and it can't happen. This is where, when we came in, we started talking to some of those car makers, started talking to NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, some of those different organizations, pulling people together. We published something we called the 5-Star Automotive Cyber Safety Framework, playing off the 5-star crash rating system, and started talking about that, trying to get some adoption and awareness, and managed to actually, I think, incept quite a few car makers who, some of them hired CISOs because they saw an increase in talks at Black Hat. But when they got there, they didn't have a toolkit, right? You tend to apply what you have, and most of the toolkits we have are for how do you operate an environment? How do you build your corporate network, not how do you build a product? And so what we put out was actually really helpful for those individuals to think through as well as contribute to it, and then go apply it in their own organizations. And so we've actually seen within the car domain a couple of things come out for automotive cyber safety. NHTSA published one, the automotive ISAC published one, and we've got a couple of friends in the automotive ISAC. The person who ran the aviation ISAC for a while went over to the auto ISAC, and she's very, very friendly to hackers. So we had some successes there, and the industry had some successes there. Also, if you go back and you look, you had people at Black Hat, DEF CON, BSides, talking about medical device security issues. And there was a lot of kind of fear around medical device security because there are people walking around, probably some even in the room today, who have a higher quality of life or who wouldn't be alive without a medical device connected to them at all times. And at the time, the industry and the hackers were at odds with each other. Fortunately, the FDA stepped in and said, look, we don't know what's going on. We're not cybersecurity experts, but there's something here. We need to figure it out, and we need to figure it out together and help bring together the hackers, the manufacturers, the doctors, the patients, everybody else. And we published something else called a Hippocratic Oath for Connected Medical Devices. Again, playing off of something that most people already associate with that domain. It's on the screen here. I won't read through it, but the idea was that just as doctors take a symbolic oath to act in the best interest of their patients when they're delivering care, the same should be true with devices that deliver care now that they're the primary way that doctors interact with patients, either directly or through proxy. And this had a lot of success. The FDA, I won't go through all of the successes in this because, as Josh said, we've had a ton of success in healthcare and medical. But the FDA put out something that they call pre-market and post-market. And I won't get into all the wonky policy details of those two docs. But essentially, if something is going to go onto the market and be sold in the US, it has to follow certain guidelines. The FDA reviews that. Once it's on the market, if there are issues that come up that could impact effectiveness or patient safety, the FDA wants some ability to have the manufacturer address those. And if you put those two documents side by side and align them with this Hippocratic Oath for Connected Medical Devices, it's like one for one. Almost everything that we wrote about is now the law of the land. It's instantiated in this guidance for medical device makers that this is how the FDA is going to evaluate you. So it's not suggested, it is effective. If you want to get on the market and stay on the market, you have to follow these rules of the road. Thank you. Tons of medical device makers are out there. We have the Biohacking Village Device Lab, which if you haven't been, I highly recommend it. A bunch of medical device makers come in and bring devices, put it in front of hackers and say, we know you can hack this. We just want to know how so we can fix it. That is 180 degrees from where we were 9 years ago. There's been an amazing amount of progress there. If you look at the household IoT, so household IoT is a bit of an outlier. There's not as much human life public safety attached to that, but it is a huge issue. And I remember flying to Austin, Texas one October for an NTIA event where Alan had gathered a bunch of people to talk about software updatability, upgradability in IoT. And there were a lot of people from industry there, some of whom were all about it, and others said, it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal. Like, if something doesn't work, we'll just disconnect it from the network. That'll be fine. That's a fine solution. And I think I said something like, it's not the individual attacks against a single device that matter. It's leveraging all of those exposed, prone devices on the internet to cause harm. And what was it, Alan? Like a week later that the Mirai botnet hit? And people in the room were like, no, you're wrong. That's not going to happen. No one would ever do that. Literally a week later, this happened. And that caused a whole lot of things to happen in government. I sometimes say that government lost its collective shit because this was such a pronounced impact that they thought only a nation state could have this kind of impact, cause this kind of harm on the internet. Well, it turns out it was some college dropouts who were trying to knock a competitor's Minecraft server off the internet. So this is like hobbyists, extremely low level of capability folks who were able to have a huge outsized impact. And so there were many, many initiatives that started in the US government as well as others that led to, I think, a lot of progress in that area, up to and including, some of it kind of snowballed. And people were saying, well, if this is the impact that could happen to home IoT devices, what about bigger systems, pipelines, industrial control systems? And so you've seen in the past couple of years a series of executive orders, congressional actions, and other things looking at what we can do. And it turns out most of the government's action in this area has been, how do you operate the equipment more safely? Well, what I think a lot of us were saying and have been saying, the hackers in the world, here at DEF CON, at Black Hat, at all the other B-sides around the world, is once you get a vulnerable, exposed thing on your network, it's already too late to do a lot of the critical, safety critical steps that can only be done when you're designing, building it, and implementing it. So let's move way left, not just left of boom, but left of buy, and get to a place where we can influence those standards. So you've seen a lot of things in executive orders and in some other government requests, and right now they're trying to figure out how they can get left of buy, because in some cases their authorities don't let them. So they're working on new types of ways that they can actually equip organizations rather than hamstring them, or allow them to be hamstrung, so that when they buy something, they can know what the security posture of that thing is. They can put measures in place, and they can choose alternates if what they see in the market, in some segments of the market, doesn't have the security capabilities they need. So for all of the badness we still are in, there's been a lot of progress. And our day one thesis was, can't be just us doing it. And it can't be any part of any sector, any industry, any government doing this. It's got to be all of us working together. And so where we see some of those successes, I think it's our responsibility to highlight them, to promote them, to dogpile on them, to jump in and help lift those up, to make those roadmaps for success for other industries, to build on them, to extend them, and just to make sure that they get the effect that they need to have.
Yeah, there's so much to be proud of, and so many of the people in this room and not in the room, people streaming online, people at home that have done some things. So maybe to punctuate that, a couple of the things as I reflected on the flight here, there was no auto ISAC when we started. We helped get that off the ground. The 5-star has become a blueprint for how do you avoid failure, take help avoiding failure without suing the helper, capture, study, and learn from failure, respond to failure, contain and isolate failure. We affected the shape of the FDA policy for the US and the planet. We caused the first safety communication and recall with 0 dead people first. And that was like the moment when we really knew that we were onto something. We extended our reach into other areas. When that Mirai botnet happened, we wrote a fucking law. Hackers wrote a fucking law. Now, obviously, there were partners in the Senate and the House, and it took 2 entire congressional sessions. But in late 2020, that thing passed into law. So minimum hygiene standards for IoT purchasing. He mentioned the executive orders. We knew that this isn't just about responding to failure, but this is making more rugged, defensible, survivable, anti-fragile things. And then we've really tried to ensure that the next generation regulatory is focused on threat modeling and patchability and maintainability and embrace of hackers acting in good faith with coordinated vulnerability disclosure programs, which is now required for all federal agencies. All federal agencies have to have a coordinated vulnerability disclosure. You're going to hear from Leonard, they'd be actually giving guidance to not prosecute hackers acting in good faith. So we are increasingly making it easier for us to keep people safe. And then when the planet was going through a once in 100 years, very dangerous, very lethal event, they turned to several cavalry people to both design and implement what the federal and global response should look like. So we got to put on, get conscripted to a certain extent and put on go time. And we could only do this because of the collaboration and creativity of every single one of you. And we hacked the government in lawful ways and hacked the planet. I mean, I don't think they fully realize the impact, the long-term impact of some of the things that we publish, like bad practices. This is already changing insurance. We have declared what bad looks like, what negligent looks like, what dangerous looks like. And the standard you walk past is the standard you endorse. And just in case you don't come for Don's part, at least the 2 we got through initially was the use of unsupported end-of-life software in service of critical infrastructure and national critical functions is dangerous and materially elevates risks to public safety, economic, and national security. This dangerous practice is especially egregious in internet reachable technologies. We've now put a stake in the ground that could enable insurance exceptions, wrongful death lawsuits, FTC consent decrees, you name it, regulatory action. And then number 2 is the use of hard-coded default and guessable maintenance passwords is also dangerous. So this is a growing list of things, and some of those hacks will have long-standing future implications. But these were powerless hackers at BSides being bold and trying to make sure that we hold ourselves to a better standard. So before I shift to the last 10 minutes of Ramon's concert, I'm going to say one of the lines we got into the executive order, because I think this is me trying to channel my inner Dan Gear. But now that things are on fire, it's just a riff on what our day one problem statement was. I said that in the end, the trust we place in our digital infrastructure should be proportional to how trustworthy and transparent that infrastructure is, and to the consequences we will incur if that trust is misplaced. And I've always looked at this group as we trust things without them deserving the trust, and we want to, narrow the gap between overdependence on undependable things and ensuring that our neighbors and our loved ones can enjoy the benefits of those connected technologies with the promise without the peril. And I've always said the failure mode wasn't the specific losses of life. It's any crisis of confidence in the public to trust these superior technologies. So we are, in my opinion, the lighthouse keepers to be that heat, be light, be heat, be good, to try to ensure that we're warning of both the promise and the peril of these choices and that overdependence. And we're in a very dangerous moment in history where we're out of balance there. And your actions to date have put us on a better footing, but there's so much more to do for the next couple of years. And I hope to answer the question of what should the cavalry look like with you today and tomorrow and throughout the rest of the week and through DEF CON. But Beau's really taken some of this spirit into the DEF CON policy track, village, whatever we want to call it. And just walk around the villages, Maritime Village, Aerospace Village, ICS Village, Biohacking Village. We have a large auto hacking village. We have a large and growing tribe of tribes that are all learning from each other and making each other better through parallel experimentation. So I can't wait to see what you bring to this. All right, harsh transition to the last maybe 10 minutes. I'm not going to show you everything, but I was spitting fire in New York City 2-3 weeks ago. I'm just going to show a few things there from there. All right, so Andrea Matwishin had said, no one's going to listen to you. It's not going to be like a Cyber 9/11 or Cyber Pearl Harbor. It's going to be like the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, right? It caught on fire and stayed on fire. How do you put out a river on fire? You all heard this from me if you've been in these rooms before. We have had fires, folks. We had Oldsmar Water Facility. The water we drink has been on fire. The food we put on our table with JBS and other meat and food supply chain attacks, fire. The oil and gas that fuels our cars and our homes, fire. The municipalities, the schools, the people who function, our local governments and our federal governments at the national security level have seen compromises, and even fire. Timely access to patient care, which Kendra's session is going to go through in extreme detail. But we have had losses of life. So the precursors were when I started that, we served on a congressional task force for healthcare industry cybersecurity as part of the CISA 2015 law. And in spring of 2016, a single Java flaw and a single, it was a deserialization flaw in a single JBoss library and a single medical technology took out Hollywood Presbyterian Hospital for a week. You had to divert ambulances in LA traffic. Even a block in LA is maybe not a survivable reroute. They actually canceled surgeries, moved patients throughout the week. It was harrowing. Later on, when we were about to publish, or just had published, the Mirai botnet that we referred to, we published our healthcare task force report saying overtly healthcare cybersecurity is in critical condition. I'm reminding you of this slide because Kendra may have a slide that says provide medical care is in critical condition at the national level. But the idea here was these were the cyber poor. They didn't have security people on staff. They were defending Windows XP or older. They were overconnected to each other, flat, unsegmented networks, and reachable by the outside world. This wasn't about privacy. I love my privacy. I want to be alive to enjoy it. And yet everything was about HIPAA. And then lastly, Billy Rios pointed out a typical medical device could have 1,000 or more CVEs in it. And while most of those are not exploitable, it just takes one. And we said, this is not good. And we talked about, well, there's no money. And we said, well, you can't afford to protect it. You can't afford to connect it. Or my Stan Lee friendlier version of with great connectivity comes great responsibility. And then our UK partners had 40% of their national health service disrupted for Mother's Day weekend within days of us trying to publish this. So the U.S. got quite lucky, but NotPetya actually did more damage to U.S. infrastructure, including nuanced software and a bunch of medical devices, and some hospitals shut down for time, and some kids in this book they were cleared for surgery, so kids had potentially delayed surgery because of the entanglement and brittleness of IT systems. Little kids couldn't, get surgery without some heroism from maybe somebody in this room. And what we know is that delays cause patient outcome harm. So you've seen this from me before, but I'm reminding us as a primer for Kendra's session here. We know from a seminal piece of New England Journal of Medicine, a study that has nothing to do with cybersecurity, that if you have a heart attack during a U.S. marathon, in a U.S. marathon city during a marathon, you're more likely to die. And the reason is the 4.4 minute longer ambulance ride to get around the runners had a statistically significant mortality rate after 30 days. So we know time equals mortality for some of these immeasurable, quantifiable ways. And I said, okay, so this was from Christian Demeth, one of our fantastic teammates, and Jeff Tully, board certified physicians that grew up going to DEF CON, Quadi, and Replicant. And they helped us understand that certain time-sensitive conditions, any delay, irrespective of cause, can affect mortality. So if we know delay affects mortality for brain, for heart, for pulmonary, on a certain graduated timelines, if cybersecurity can introduce significant delay, cybersecurity can introduce loss of life. So we started killing people at the CyberMed Summit, which is now its own nonprofit. CyberMed is doing a lot more and formalized, including the first DC event recently, where I think Senator Warner gave our opening remarks. And we showed that you could introduce real hacking in contrast with real physiology to see if doctors can notice what happened, save the lives, and through demonstrable real-world hacks like insulin pumps like Jay Radcliffe, like the bedside infusion pump from Billy Rios, like the hacking of pacemaker defibrillators, maybe with a 3-digit universal access code that maybe caused a recall, that these physicians, as well-trained as they are, implicitly trusted this technology and were gobsmacked. We then started doing more tabletop crisis simulations to test their assumptions and saw different failures. We hacked the integrity of blood banks in the OR so that you put the wrong blood type in the surgical field and it coagulates and bad things happen. And we found you could even hack people without touching them. If you can't tell if a stroke is a rupture versus a clot, the clot buster is a miracle drug that will save your brain and save life. Time is brain. But if you can't diagnose it quick enough, if you give that to a rupture, you'll kill the person. They'll bleed out. So just merely disrupting imaging and not having next proximal alternative care in driving distance or helicopter distance meant people died that didn't need to. And then you don't even have to hack the device at all. There was an incredibly expensive radiation delivery precision machine that heavily relies on cloud computing. The cloud was down for a very long period of time during the pandemic. And so those incredibly expensive, otherwise functioning radiation delivery devices couldn't do their job. They were bricks, big, heavy paperweights, because we always assume the cloud will always be there, except for when it isn't. So during the breaking points here, this is where I get heavy, okay? And I may say more during the week, but this has really messed me up from my public service, and I'm getting over it. I'm trying. But when the country hit 500,000 dead Americans from COVID, we also hit 150,000 additional Americans who lost their lives from non-COVID excess deaths. The CDC tracks excess deaths all the time. It's a rolling average of who died in which state, in which month, from which condition. So if you normally see 100 from this place in this state, and you see 110, you have 10 excess deaths. I asked my team, hey, I bet you these are time-sensitive conditions. What's killing these people? Let's study it. And remembering the 4.4 minutes can lead to loss of life for a heart, and 4 hours, 1 to 3 to 4 hours is loss of life for strokes. What could 4 weeks do? 4 weeks of regional outage to the state of Vermont. So I said, we need to study this, and we need to understand what happened. And my team is going to take us through that in the next session. But while we were racing to publish, and it took much longer to publish than I'm comfortable with, and a lot of extra people died in the meantime, the Wall Street Journal put on the front page that baby is possibly the first victim of cyber disruption, degrading and delaying care enough. We are surrounded by technology. This is the bonding moment Beau and I had 9 years ago in the speaker lounge about, what was it, Conficker on the NICU, infant fetal heart monitors. If you degrade these technology assists, you degrade the care. We have more patients admitted because we have been able to scale with technology. You take that technology away, and you're in much more dangerous moments. So the patient has to be at the center of this, and lives have to be at the center of this. We should care less about record count and more about human life, timely access to care. So we published some stuff. It took a long time. A lot of people in government did not want us to publish this, but we are tenacious and stubborn and creative, and we did a turducken within a turducken. But we got it published, and essentially what we found was back in March of 2020, 2021 at the 1 year mark, we said, are there any leading indicators that correlate to this excess death surging we had? And what we found was another public data source called ICU bed count, or intensive care unit bed count. 75% is usually optimal. During the pandemic, it was fatal, and we measurably so. And for example, what we saw is if you hit 75% ICU strain nationwide, you'd see 18,000 dead Americans 2 weeks later, and additional months 4 and 6 weeks later. If you got to 100%, you'd see 80,000 dead Americans. And unlike COVID deaths, these were primarily 25 to 44-year-olds. These are younger people that needed timely access to care. I myself almost didn't get timely enough care for surgery because of the strains on these hospitals. So we wanted to warn people that if you could manage your ICU strain, you could avoid elective loss of life. And we published this, something that Kendra is going to walk through, called Provide Medical Cares in Critical Condition. And through this analysis, we could see that systems hit by ransomware for protracted amounts of time could be strained sufficient to lead to loss of life. And I recently testified to the Senate on the record that these attacks have led to measurable loss of life. So it's in the ecosystem now. And what I'm asking each of you for the next couple of days is not just to up and renew your participation, but how do we change the conversation so that whenever someone says there's an attack, we don't just go back to, well, how many records were there? Or what was the cost of the ransom? Or is there a HIPAA fine? None of those things matter. What matters is timely access to patient care for you, for your loved ones. Because a growing toll from these attacks is that we have seen 10, 20, and 30% losses of critical infrastructure workforce. The people who make sure we have drinkable water, who make sure we have food supplies and groceries stocked, who make sure we have timely access to patient care, who make sure the oil and gas and electricity works. And we are fucking with Maslow, and we can't. So as the world is increasingly depending on digital infrastructure, they are increasingly depending on us. So what role will you play? And how should we change over the next 2 days? Because we've done some incredible things over the last 9 years. We've been left a boom more times than I ever expected. But there's a lot of booms right now. Shit's on fire. What are we going to do about it? Thank you for being here, and I'm out of time.